Good evening, dear listener. On tonight's show, we travel to the past, to a time when the mountains of Japan were still vast and untamed, and the line between our world and the world of spirits was as thin as a single frosted breath. Our story is one of winter, of a promise made in the heart of a blizzard, and of a love as beautiful and as dangerous as a perfect, flawless icicle. This is the tale of the Yuki-onna, the Snow Woman. Our story begins with a young man named Minoru. He was not a lord, nor a samurai, but a woodcutter. His world was the forest. His hands were calloused from the handle of his axe, and his face was weathered by the sun of summer and the frost of winter. But his eyes were clear, and his heart was strong. Minoru lived in a small village nestled in a valley, a cluster of thatched roofs that looked like sleeping animals from the mountain paths above. Every morning, he would walk those paths, leaving the scent of wood smoke and miso soup behind, and venturing into the silent, ancient forest. He knew the woods intimately. He knew the sharp, clean scent of pine and cedar, the earthy smell of damp moss clinging to rocks, and the whisper of the wind as it moved through the high branches, a sound he could read like a language. It told him when the weather was turning, when the animals were near, when a storm was gathering its breath over the high peaks. On this particular day, the air was still, too still. A strange, heavy silence had fallen over the forest, a silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The sky was the color of a dull grey pearl. Minoru, working alongside an older woodcutter named Mosaku, felt a prickle of unease on his skin. Mosaku, whose face was a road map of wrinkles and whose back was bent from a lifetime of labor, paused and spat on the snow. "The mountain is holding its breath, Minoru," he rasped, his own breath fogging in the frigid air. "The Tengu are angry today. We should have turned back." Minoru looked up at the sky. He couldn't smell snow, not yet. But he could feel it, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It felt like the mountain itself was watching them with a cold, indifferent eye. "Just a few more logs, Mosaku-san," Minoru replied, his voice steady. "The village needs the wood. We will be quick." But the mountain had other plans. It started not with a flurry, but with a sigh. A single cold gust of wind that snaked through the trees, rattling the bare branches like bones. Then another. Within minutes, the pearly sky had darkened to a bruised purple, and the first flakes of snow began to fall. They were not the soft, gentle flakes of a winter morning. They were hard, sharp, and driven by a wind that was quickly rising to a furious howl. The world vanished. One moment, Minoru could see the trees, the path, his own axe leaning against a stump. The next, there was nothing but a churning, blinding wall of white. The wind shrieked in his ears, a physical force that pushed and pulled, trying to tear the pack of wood from his back. The cold was a living thing. It seeped through his thick clothes, bit at his exposed skin, and sank its teeth deep into his bones. The clean scent of pine was gone, replaced by the sterile metallic smell of airborne ice. "Mosaku-san!" Minoru shouted, but the wind snatched the words from his lips and tore them to shreds. He could barely see his own hands in front of his face. Panic, cold and sharp as the snow, began to rise in his chest. They were lost. They stumbled on, directionless, fighting for every step in the deepening snow. Mosaku, older and weaker, was failing. His breaths came in ragged, wheezing gasps. He stumbled once, then twice. The third time, he did not get up. Minoru knelt beside him, the wind screaming around them. Mosaku's eyes were glassy, his lips blue. "A hut," the old man whispered, his voice a dry crackle. "I remember a hunter's hut nearby." Hope is a strange, stubborn thing. With his last reserves of strength, Minoru hoisted Mosaku onto his back and pressed on, calling out into the white void. And then, like a ghost materializing from the storm, he saw it. A dark shape, a small, dilapidated hut, half buried in the snow. The relief that washed over Minoru was so intense it almost brought him to his knees. He pushed the frozen door open and dragged Mosaku inside. It was little more than a single dark room, empty and smelling of old dust and decay. But it was shelter. It was a reprieve from the relentless assault of the storm. Minoru laid Mosaku down gently and tried to rub some warmth back into the old man's limbs, but it was no use. Mosaku's breathing was shallow. His eyes were closed. The cold had settled deep inside him. As Minoru worked, a new kind of cold began to fill the tiny hut, a cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. It was a profound, absolute chill, the cold of the deepest abyss, the cold of the grave. The air grew thick with frost. Minoru looked up and saw that the door, which he had forced shut, was now slowly, silently creaking open. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was impossibly beautiful and impossibly terrifying. Her skin was the color of fresh, untouched snow, a pure, luminous white that seemed to glow in the gloom. Her hair was a river of polished jet black, falling starkly against her pale shoulders. But it was her eyes that held Minoru captive. They were the color of a frozen lake under a winter moon, and they held no warmth, no pity, only a chilling, ancient emptiness. She wore a simple white kimono, yet the blizzard did not seem to touch her. Not a single snowflake clung to her hair or clothes. She moved into the room without a sound, her feet seeming to glide over the floorboards. She knelt beside the still form of Mosaku. She leaned down, and her lips, the color of faint winter lavender, touched the old man's face. She did not kiss him. She simply breathed upon him. A small white cloud of frost escaped her lips, and as it touched Mosaku, the last flicker of life in him vanished. He was no longer a dying man. He was a statue of ice. Minoru was frozen in place, not by the cold, but by a terror so pure and absolute it stole the air from his lungs. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body was a prisoner. The snow woman turned her gaze upon him. Her eyes traveled over his face, his youth, his dark hair dusted with snow. A flicker of something unreadable passed through their icy depths. She glided towards him, and he could feel the temperature dropping with every step she took. He could smell ozone, the scent of a storm, and something else, a faint, cold fragrance, like winter plum blossoms blooming in a graveyard. She reached out a hand, her long white fingers like icicles. She traced the line of his jaw, and his skin burned where she touched it, a searing, freezer burn pain. "You are young," she whispered, and her voice was the sound of ice cracking on a still lake, the rustle of frozen leaves. "It would be a pity to still your warm blood." She leaned closer, her face inches from his. Her breath, a visible cloud of frost, washed over him. He felt his life force begin to drain away, pulled from him by her Arctic presence. "I will let you live," she said, her voice dropping lower, "but you must make me a promise. You will never speak of me. You will never tell anyone what you saw in this hut tonight. If you ever break this vow, I will know, and I will return for you." Minoru, his throat tight with fear, could only manage a single desperate nod. She looked at him for a moment longer, her gaze unwavering. Then she smiled. It was a small, sad, chilling smile, and she leaned in and pressed her frozen lips to his cheek. The kiss was not a kiss of passion, but of ice and finality. It was a brand of pure cold that sank through his skin and into his soul. Then, as silently as she had arrived, she turned and glided out of the hut, disappearing back into the swirling white chaos of the blizzard. The moment she was gone, the unnatural cold receded, replaced by the simple, brutal cold of the storm. And Minoru, his body finally released from its paralysis, fell into a black, dreamless faint. When Minoru awoke, it was to silence. The storm had passed. A single pale beam of sunlight lanced through a crack in the hut's roof, illuminating a swirl of dust motes. The world outside was pristine, buried under a thick blanket of new snow, sparkling under a clear blue sky. It was so peaceful, so beautiful, it felt unreal. Beside him, Mosaku lay still and cold, his face peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. But Minoru knew better. He managed to carry the old man's body back to the village. He told them Mosaku had succumbed to the cold, that they had been separated in the storm. He said nothing of the hut, nothing of the woman made of snow. The promise was a cold stone in his gut, and the memory of her kiss was a phantom chill on his cheek that never seemed to fade. Life returned to its rhythms. The seasons turned. Winter melted into a wet, earthy spring. Spring burst into a lush, vibrant summer, full of the drone of cicadas and the smell of cut grass. Summer faded into a crisp, colorful autumn. Minoru worked. He ate. He slept. But a part of him remained frozen in that hut. He was quiet, reserved, and a shadow of sorrow lingered in his eyes. Then, one afternoon in the following spring, a stranger arrived in the village. She was a woman, traveling alone, who said she was on her way to the city, but had become enchanted by the beauty of their valley. Her name was Yuki. She was the most beautiful woman Minoru had ever seen. Her skin was as smooth and pale as fine porcelain. Her hair was long and black as lacquer, and her smile was gentle and shy. There was a quiet, graceful stillness about her that drew everyone in. Minoru found himself watching her. His heart, which he thought had been frozen solid, beginning to ache with a feeling he couldn't name. Yuki decided to stay. She found work weaving silk, and her skill was unmatched. Her fingers moved with a swift, silent grace, creating patterns as intricate as frost on a window pane. Minoru and Yuki found themselves drawn to one another. They would speak by the village well, their conversations soft and hesitant at first, then flowing like the stream that ran through the valley. He loved the sound of her laugh, which was like the tinkling of small, clear bells. She loved his quiet strength, the kindness in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. That summer, they were married. The years that followed were the happiest of Minoru's life. The cold stone in his gut dissolved, melted by the warmth of Yuki's love. The phantom chill on his cheek faded, replaced by the genuine soft warmth of her hand. Their home was filled with light and laughter. Yuki was a perfect wife. She was kind, patient, and her love for Minoru was a quiet, deep ocean. They had children, 2 sons and then a daughter, all with their mother's black hair and their father's strong spirit. Minoru would come home from the forest, tired and smelling of pine, and the sight of Yuki by the hearth, their children playing at her feet, would fill him with a profound gratitude that brought tears to his eyes. There were, however, small oddities. Things he noticed but chose to ignore. Yuki never seemed to feel the cold. On the most frigid winter days, she would walk outside without a shawl, her skin glowing with health. And she had a strange, almost fearful aversion to heat. She would never sit too close to the fire, and she would never ever take a hot bath, always preferring a quick wash with cool water, even in the dead of winter. But these were small things, tiny clouds in a vast, sunny sky. Minoru was happy. He was content. The memory of the blizzard, of the hut, of the terrifying woman made of snow, had faded into the back of his mind, becoming little more than a half-remembered nightmare. He had almost convinced himself it had never happened at all. Almost. One winter night, many years later, a storm descended upon the valley. It was a fierce, howling blizzard, much like the one from all those years ago. The wind rattled the shutters of their small house, and the snow beat against the walls. Inside, however, it was warm and safe. The children were asleep, bundled in their futons. Minoru and Yuki sat together by the glowing embers of the hearth fire. The light cast a warm orange glow on her face, making her look even more beautiful. Minoru watched her as she mended one of their son's tunics, her fingers moving with their usual silent grace. He was overwhelmed with a wave of love for her, for the life they had built. "Yuki," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up, her dark eyes questioning. "Your beauty," he continued, a wistful smile on his face. "Especially on a night like this. It reminds me of something that happened to me, long ago. A strange, almost dreamlike event. I've never told another soul." A flicker of stillness came over Yuki. Her hands, for the first time since he had known her, stopped their work. "What is it, my husband?" she asked, her voice very, very quiet. Lulled by the warmth of the fire and the decades of love that lay between them, feeling safe and secure in his home, Minoru forgot. He forgot the cold, he forgot the fear, and he forgot the solemn promise he had made. "I was a young man," he began, his voice taking on a storyteller's tone. "Lost in a blizzard, just like this one. I thought I was going to die. But I found an old hut, and in that hut, I met a woman. She was the most beautiful creature I had ever seen. She looked so much like you, Yuki. Skin like snow, hair like night. But she wasn't human. She was a spirit, I think. She was terrifying, but she let me live." He laughed, a small, soft sound. "She made me promise never to speak of her. How foolish it all seems now." He looked at his wife, expecting her to share in his nostalgic amusement. But Yuki was not smiling. The warmth in the room vanished. A bitter, arctic cold radiated from where she sat, extinguishing the cozy heat of the fire. The air grew thin and sharp. Frost, white and feathery, began to creep across the wooden floor from her feet, sparkling like crushed diamonds in the dying firelight. Yuki slowly rose to her feet. The gentle, loving woman Minoru had known for years was gone. Her face was a mask of incandescent rage and profound sorrow. Her eyes were no longer the warm, dark pools he loved. They were the frozen lakes of his nightmares, deep and empty. She was a stranger. "You promised," she whispered, and her voice was no longer the soft bell of his memory. It was the sound of a glacier cracking, of a winter wind moaning over a barren grave. "You promised you would never tell anyone. You broke your vow, Minoru." Her form began to shimmer, her dark hair swirling around her as if caught in an unfelt wind. Her white kimono began to glow with a cold internal light. She was the woman from the hut. She was the Yuki-onna. Minoru scrambled backwards, his heart a block of ice in his chest. "Yuki, please, if it were not for our children," she hissed, the words turning to frost in the air, "I would freeze you where you stand, just as I did that old man so long ago. But for them, for my precious children, I will spare your life." She glided towards the door, her feet not touching the frost-covered floor. "You must take good care of them," she commanded, her voice echoing with the power of the storm. "If you ever fail them, if a single tear falls from their eyes because of your neglect, I will know, and I will return. And that time, my vengeance will be swift and absolute." She reached the door. It dissolved into a flurry of snow before her. She turned for one last look at the man she had loved, and in the depths of her icy eyes, Minoru saw a flicker of unbearable agony. Then she stepped into the storm and vanished. The wind howled, the snow swirled into the room, and then she was gone. The cold receded. The fire in the hearth was nothing but dead, grey ash. Minoru was left alone in the sudden deafening silence, the chill of her presence seeping into the very timbers of the house. He was alone with his sleeping children, his broken promise, and a grief so vast and so cold it would never leave him. He kept his word. He raised his children with all the love in his shattered heart, but the warmth never truly returned to his home. And every winter, when the snow fell and the wind howled, he would stare out into the white abyss, half dreading, half hoping to see a beautiful, terrible figure gliding through the storm, coming back to the life they had lost. But he never saw her again. The tale of the Yuki-onna is one of Japan's most famous ghost stories, or Kaidan. It speaks to the beauty and the cruelty of nature, especially the harshness of winter in Japan's northern provinces. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of keeping a promise, and a tragic story about the impossible love between a mortal and a spirit. Thank you for dreaming with us tonight.